Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're taking our usual journey into the past, but we're framing it as a true crime investigation. Think of it as a cold case file, except the case is over 2,000 years old. The crime scene is a public highway, and forensics, well, let's just say the concept hasn't been invented yet. We're heading back to the chaotic final days of the Roman Republic, where politics was a full-minus contact sport, and a public feud could easily end with a body on the road. Honestly, if you were dropped into this time period, you probably wouldn't last the first day without accidentally offending a senator's cousin and ending up in a ditch. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support means the world. And while you're at it, I love to see where everyone is listening from. Tell me your city and the time right now in the comments below. It's always a quiet thrill to see this community stretching across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is thick with dust and the scent of sun-baked pine. You're traveling south, away from the magnificent, noisy, and frankly, smelly heart of Rome. Your transport is a modest, two-wheeled carriage called a Cicero. It's the ancient equivalent of a budget taxi, fast and light, but you feel every single stone on the road. And what a road it is. You are on the Via Appia, the Appian Way. Even now, in the year 50 to BC, it's already an ancient and venerable highway, dubbed the Regina Via Rome, the Queen of Roads. It's a marvel of engineering, a straight, unwavering line cutting through the Italian countryside. The paving stones beneath your wheels are huge, irregularly shaped slabs of dark basalt, fitted together so perfectly that you can barely slide a knife blade between them. They were laid down centuries ago, designed for legions marching to war, and they feel like they'll be here forever. You can hear the rhythmic clack minus clack of your horse's hooves on the stone, a sound that has echoed down this very road for generations. To your left and right, the landscape isn't just fields and trees. It's a corridor of ghosts. Roman lover bade burials within the city walls, so the wealthy and powerful families built their final resting places along the major roads leading out of Rome. It's the most exclusive and slightly morbid suburban sprawl in the world. You pass towering, ornate mausoleums, some shaped like small temples, others like grand circular tombs decorated with statues of stern-looking ancestors. Inscriptions boast of their achievements in life, generals who conquered distant lands, politicians who held the highest offices. Tucked between these monuments are humbler graves, simple headstones for merchants or freedmen who scraped together enough money to be buried along the same prestigious route. It's a silent, stony audience, watching everyone who comes and goes from the great city. The journey feels dense, peaceful on the surface, but with an undercurrent of caution. You don't travel alone on these roads if you can help it. While the road itself is a symbol of Roman order, the spaces in between are not always so civilized. Bandits are a real, if sometimes exaggerated, threat. Historians still argue about the true level of danger on Roman roads. Were they terrifying death traps where every traveler risked ambush, or were such incidents rare and simply sensationalized by writers at the time? The consensus seems to be that it depended entirely on the region, the time of year, and frankly, your luck. Traveling in a group was just common sense. You clutch the small purse of coins hidden in your tunic a little tighter. Up ahead, you see another group of travelers heading north, towards Rome. They're a small, organized party. At the front rides a man in a carriage, looking distinguished and important. HES surrounded by a handful of attendants and, more noticeably, several large, muscular men who are clearly armed. They walk with a purpose that suggests they aren't just farmhands. They're bodyguards. This isn't an unusual sight. Any man of means would travel with protection. But then, you hear another sound from behind you, gudging up fast. It's a much larger, louder procession. A whole train of people. There are men on horseback, more carriages, and a large contingent on foot. Unlike the disciplined group ahead, this one is rowdy. You can hear laughter, shouting, and the general clamor of a crowd that feels like it owns the road. They move with a swaggering confidence, and as they get closer, you see that many of them are also armed, but in a less formal way. Some carry daggers, others heavy clubs. They look less like bodyguards and more like a street gang on a field trip. Your driver instinctively pulls your little C. I see him over to the side of the road, giving as much space as possible. You are about to be caught directly in the middle. The air, which moments ago was sleepy and still, now crackles with a new energy. The two groups are on a collision course, and you have a front-minus-row seat. The silent stone ancestors in their tombs seem to lean in a little closer, waiting. The quiet afternoon on the Queen of Roads is about to be broken. The leader of this boisterous procession comes into clear view. It's just not what you might expect from the head of a gang. He isn't some brutish, hulking gladiator. H.E.S. reclining in an open carriage, dressed in fine, but not ostentatious, traveling clothes. He looks relaxed, confident, and utterly in his element. He waves to his entourage, sharing a joke with a man riding alongside him. There's a flash of a brilliant smile. He has the easy charisma of a man who knows he is admired, even loved, by the people around him. This is Publius Clodius Pulcher, and you should know, he is our victim. The name itself tells a story. He was born a Claudius, a member of the Clodii, one of the oldest, proudest, and most arrogantly aristocratic patrician families in Rome. Think old money, but with a history stretching back to the city's mythical origins. Yet, you hear him called Clodius, the more common, Topian-minus sounding version of the name. This wasn't a typo or a nickname. It was a calculated, scandalous political act. A few years back, he had himself legally adopted by a plebeian man, a man much younger than himself, just to add a layer of absurdity to it. Also, he could shed his patrician status and be eligible to run for the office of tribune of the plebs. It was a stunning act of class betrayal, a move that made the stuffy aristocrats in the Senate clutch their pearls in horror and made the common people of Rome see him as one of their own. It was a marketing masterstroke, and as a tribune, he was an absolute force of nature. This was one of the most powerful positions in the Republic. A tribune's body was considered sacrosanctus, meaning anyone who laid a hand on him could be killed without trial. More importantly, a tribune held the power of veto over nearly any act of the Senate or another magistrate. It was a weapon designed to protect the common people, and Clodius wielded it like a cudgel. His signature achievement was a law that provided a free monthly grain dole to the citizens of Rome. Before him, the grain was subsidized but not free. Clodius made it a right. You can imagine how this played with the hundreds of thousands of urban poor, many of whom lived on the edge of starvation. To them, he was a demigod. He was a savior. He was the man who literally put bread on their tables. Of course, nothing is ever that simple in Rome. He also passed a law that legalized the collegiae. These were supposedly social or trade guilds, but many had been banned because they were effectively political clubs that could be mobilized for street violence. By legalizing them, Clodius instantly gained command of a network of organized thugs, whom he used to intimidate his political rivals, shout down speakers in the forum, and break up public meetings that weren't going his way. He was a master of chaos, a political arsonist who knew exactly how to use the anger of the mob as his personal army. This brings us to a question that historians still debate endlessly. Who was the real Clodius? Was he a genuine populist reformer, a Roman Robin Hood who truly cared for the downtrodden and was fighting a corrupt, entrenched oligarchy? Or was he a deeply cynical and power-hungry aristocrat who saw the common people as nothing more than a tool, a stepping stone for his own boundless ambition? There are good arguments on both sides. He passed genuinely beneficial legislation, but he also used violence and intimidation as his primary political language. He was either a champion of the people or the most dangerous kind of opportunist, and a symptom of the sickness that was bringing the Republic to its knees. Right now, he is a candidate for the office of praetor, a high-ranking judicial position. That's why he is on the Appian Way today. He is traveling to La Novio, a town a few miles down the road, to fulfill some local civic duty, a bit of routine glad-handing for his campaign. His large entourage isn't just for show. It's his mobile campaign rally and his security detail rolled into one. You see the faces in his crowd. Yes, there are hired toughs and gladiators, their muscles bulging under their tunics. But they're also ordinary citizens, freedmen, shopkeepers, all swept up in the magnetic field of his personality. They look at him with genuine devotion. They would follow this man anywhere. His procession rumbles past you, a wave of noise and dust and energy. You watch them move down the road, a self-contained ecosystem of loyalty and menace. Your gaze follows them, and then shifts further down the straight, unwavering line of the Appian Way. There, still approaching, is the other, smaller, more orderly group. The two parties are now separated by only a few hundred yards of ancient, unforgiving stone. And the man in that other carriage is about to have his afternoon very ruined. Now let your eyes drift to that other traveler, the one heading towards Rome. His name is Titus Annius Milo, and in our little true-minus crime drama, he is the prime suspect. Milo is, in many ways, the mirror image of Clodius, a negative print of the same ambition. He is also a politician, also deeply wealthy, and also a candidate in the upcoming elections. He is running for the highest office of them all, the consulship. Becoming consul was the absolute pinnacle of a Roman's career, the ultimate prize in the ruthless game of politics. And right now, the race between him and his rivals is vicious, expensive, and deeply personal. Unlike Clodius, Milo doesn't pretend to be a man of the people. He styles himself as a champion of the optimates, the best men. This was the conservative faction of the Senate, the established aristocracy who saw themselves as the guardians of tradition, order, and the Republic's sacred institutions, the very institutions Clodius seemed so gleefully to be tearing down. To them, Clodius was the reformer. He was a cancer, a demagogue stirring up the dregs of society to create anarchy for his own selfish ends. Milo positioned himself as the antidote. He was the strong man of the establishment, the one willing to fight fire with fire. His appearance is quite different from Clodius's relaxed, charismatic air. Milo is traveling in a heavier carriage, accompanied by his wife, Fausta, the daughter of the infamous dictator Sulla, which adds a certain inherited gravitas and menace to his profile. His entourage is smaller but more professional. You don't see a rowdy mob of supporters. You see a disciplined, and spick crew of gladiators and loyal freedmen. These aren't fans, they are employers. They are his private army, and their purpose is not to cheer, but to fight. Milo understood Clodius's game perfectly, and his response was to build a bigger, meaner gang. He became the anti-gang leader. For years, the streets of Rome had been the battleground for these two men's private armies. The Forum, the very heart of Roman civic life, regularly descended into brawls. Elections were disrupted, political rallies turned into riots, and prominent citizens were harassed and intimidated. It was a complete breakdown of civic order. The Senate was either unable or unwilling to stop it. In this vacuum of authority, strongmen like Milo and Clodius thrived. Milo would argue, quite loudly, that he was only doing what was necessary. How else do you deal with a man like Clodius who thumbs his nose at the law? You can't debate him. You have to beat him. He was, in his own mind, restoring order by using chaos's own tools against it. This is where you encounter a fascinating and slightly depressing cold fact about the late Republic. Political violence was becoming normalized. It was a recognized, if officially condemned, part of the political toolkit. A popular tactic was the upper room dux, the leader of works, which was a polite euphemism for a gang leader. Both Milo and Clodius were masters of this. Their gangs weren't just random folks. They were organized, paid, and deployed with strategic precision. Need to prevent a rival from passing a law. Send your boys to the forum to physically block him from reaching the speaker's platform. Worried about the vote count in a particular district. Have your gangs persuade voters to stay home. It was brutal, effective, and a clear sign that the traditional mechanisms of the Republic were failing. So, as you watch Milo's carriage approach, you see a man who likely feels he is on the verge of greatness. If he wins the consulship, he will be at the apex of the Roman world. He has spent a fortune on this campaign, bribing, promising, and, of course, fighting his way towards his goal. His journey today is as mundane as Clodius says. He is also coming from La Nuvia, where he held the title of dictator, not the almighty's powerful kind, but a more ancient, local magisterial role, which is a bit of an ironic historical footnote. He had gone there to appoint a priest, a simple administrative task. Now, he is on his way home to Rome, probably thinking about the final, frantic days of the campaign. There is, of course, a historical debate about Milo's character, much like with Clodius. Was he a genuine patriot, the man who, however flawed his methods, truly believed he was saving the Republic from a dangerous revolutionary? Or was he just another ambitious aristocrat, every bit as power-minus hungry as his rival, who cynically wrapped himself in the flag of law and order to justify his own thuggery? Maybe he was a bit of both. He was a product of his time, and the times were violent and desperate. The two carriages draw closer. The Queen of Rhodes, this perfect symbol of Roman power and order, is about to host a meeting between the two greatest agents of chaos in the city. The air feels heavy. The silence of the tombs lining the road seems to be holding its breath. Two men, two gangs, one narrow road. Something has to give. To truly understand the sheer, visceral hatred simmering between these two men as their carriages roll towards each other, you have to rewind the clock about a decade. We need to go back to the year 60 to BC, to a night that lives on in Roman history for its sheer, theatrical absurdity. It's the origin story of their feud. Picture this. You are inside the home of the most powerful man in Rome, Gaius Julius Caesar. At this point, he is the Pontifex Maximus, the chief high priest of the Roman state religion, and he is also praetor. His official residence, the Domus Publica, is located right in the heart of the Roman Forum. Tonight, his house is hosting one of the most sacred and mysterious religious rites in the entire Roman calendar, the Festival of the Bona Dei, the good goddess. This is an all-minus female affair. And when I say all-minus female, I mean it in the strictest possible sense. The rituals are a complete secret, known only to women. No man is ever allowed to witness them, or even be in the house while they are performed. The very presence of a male, even an accidental one, is considered a terrifying act of sacrilege, a pollution of the sacred rites that could bring divine wrath down upon the entire city of Rome. The festival is being hosted by Caesar's wife, Pompeii, and the attendees are the most elite women of the Roman aristocracy. The Vestal virgins are present. The atmosphere is one of deep, solemn religious observance. Now, into this scene of sacred female exclusivity, enters a man, or rather, a man disguised as a woman. You can almost imagine the scene playing out like a bad comedy sketch. They figure, dressed in the garb of a female lute minus player, slips into the house. The disguise is, apparently, not very convincing. The person is described as having a youthful, beardless face, which helps, but the voice gives it away. A serving girl, suspicious of this oddly deep minus voiced musician, challenges the intruder. A brief, panicked chase ensues. The alarm is raised. The man is in the house. The sacred rites are immediately halted. The house is searched, and hiding in the chambers of one of Caesar's female servants, they find him. Of course, it's our man, Publius Clodius Pulcher. Why on earth would he do this? The official story, the one that scandalized Rome, was that he was having an affair with Caesar's wife, Pompeii, and had used this insane ploy to arrange a secret rendezvous. It was a story so juicy, so packed with high-minus society drama and blasphemy, that the entire city was captivated. This is one of those little historical details that feels more like tabloid gossip than history, but it had massive political consequences. The specific claim of an affair with Pompeii is debated by some historians. Was it real, or was it a convenient, undamaging accusation cooked up by his enemies to explain his bizarre actions? The alternate theory is that Clodius, being the audacious provocateur that he was, did it simply because he could, for the thrill of breaking the ultimate taboo and showing that nothing was secret to him. Either way, the fallout was immense. Caesar, in a masterfully pragmatic move, immediately divorced his wife Pompeii. When asked why, he gave the immortal line, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion." He wasn't necessarily saying she was guilty, but the mere existence of the scandal was enough. He skillfully sidestepped the mess, leaving Clodius to face the music alone. And face it, he did. He was put on trial for sacrilege, a capital offense. This is where the feud begins to truly ignite. The chief prosecutor, leading the charge against Clodius with venomous relish, was a man named Lucius Licinius Lucullus. He had a personal score to settle, as Clodius had previously undermined his military command in the east, and one of Lucullus's key witnesses, a man who swore under oath that he had seen Clodius in Rome on the day of the crime, destroying Clodius's alibi that he was out of town, was a young, up-minus coming politician. His name was Cicero. The trial was a circus. Clodius, never one to be cornered, used his vast family wealth to bribe the jury on a spectacular scale. The verdict was a shocking acquittal. Clodius walked free, but he never forgot the men who had tried to destroy him. His hatred for the conservative senators, and especially for Cicero, now burned with the heat of 1,000 suns. So where does Milo fit into this? At the time, he was a more minor player, but he was firmly in the camp of Cicero and the Optimates. As Clodius's power and his street gangs grew in the following years, Cicero and his allies found themselves physically threatened. They needed a protector, a bulldog. They needed someone willing to get their hands dirty. They found that man in Milo. Milo became Cicero's shield, and by extension, the sworn enemy of Clodius. Every street brawl, every disrupted assembly, every political maneuver over the next 10 years was just another chapter in the war that had begun on that scandalous night in Caesar's house. It was a feud born from sacrilege, nurtured by political ambition, and now it was barreling towards its bloody conclusion on the Appian Way. Let's zoom in on the entourages for a moment, because this isn't just about the rich guys who dislike each other. This is about their instruments of power. You need to understand that the gangs of Clodius and Milo weren't just a random collection of street toughs. They were a fundamental, if ugly, part of the political machinery of the late Republic. Welcome to the world of the Roman collegiae. On the surface, a collegium was a perfectly respectable institution. It could be a trade guild for craftsmen like silverstimas or flute-minus players, a social club for a neighborhood, or a burial society where members pooled their money to ensure everyone got a decent funeral. They were the fabric of social life for the common Roman, the non-minus elite who didn't have a famous family name. They provided community, mutual support, and a sense of identity. In a city as vast and anonymous as Rome, these clubs were essential. However, their ability to organize and mobilize large groups of people made them ripe for political exploitation. For decades, powerful politicians had quietly co-sucted these guilds, turning them into private political machines. A wealthy patron would lavish gifts and money on a collegium, and in return, the members would show up to support him at rallies, cheer for his speeches in the forum, and, when necessary, intimidate his opponents. It was a system of patronage and loyalty that operated completely outside the formal structures of government. The Senate, seeing the potential for chaos, had tried to suppress them, passing a law in 64 BC that banned most of them. Then along came Clodius. In one of his most transformative acts as tribune in 58 BC, he passed a law that not only legalized the collegiae, but actively encouraged their formation. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Almost overnight, the entire city was organized into a network of these clubs, and Clodius, as their great patron and protector, was their de facto commander. His power base was no longer just the abstract mob. It was a structured, semi-disciplined army of urban dwellers, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Let's look at who made up these gangs. It's a fascinating cross-minus section of Roman society. You have freedmen, former slaves, who were intensely loyal to their patrons. You have small shopkeepers and artisans, who might join for protection or because their guild was aligned with a certain politician. And of course, you have the muscle. Clodius was known to hire professional gladiators, men trained to kill for public entertainment, as his personal bodyguards and enforcers. These were the shock troops. Imagine trying to give a speech in the forum while a dozen trained killers are standing in the front row, just staring at you. It tended to focus the mind. This is a great example of a detail that historians love to pick apart. What was the exact composition of these gangs? Some ancient sources portray them as nothing more than slaves and criminals, the absolute dregs of society. This was certainly the line that Clodius's enemies, like Cicero, pushed, but modern historians often have a more nuanced view. They argue that many members were ordinary, working-class citizens who were genuinely drawn to Clodius's populist message. For them, joining a collegium and participating in street politics was just thuggery. It was a form of political expression, one of the few available to them. The academic debate continues. Were they an organized crime syndicate or a grassroots political movement? The truth is, they were probably a messy, volatile combination of both. Now look at Milo's crew. He saw what Clodius was doing and essentially said, "They'll see your gang and raise you on." He used his immense personal fortune to create his own private army. He didn't have the broad, popular base of Clodius, so he focused on quality over quantity. He bought the contracts of entire troops of gladiators. He hired retired soldiers and other professional toughs. His gang was less a popular movement and more a private security firm. If Clodius's gang was a sprawling militia, Milo's was a team of special operatives. Their clashes were legendary. They fought pitched battles in the middle of Rome. They would besiege each other's houses. On one famous occasion, Clodius's gang trapped Milo in his own home for days. On another, Milo's gang attacked Clodius in the forum, and the great orator Cicero had to be smuggled away to safety, disguised and hidden in a litter. This wasn't politics anymore. It was low-grade civil war, fought block by block. The rule of law had broken down, replaced by the rule of the stronger gang. So as you stand on the side of the Appian Way, you realize you aren't just watching two carriages pass each other. You are watching two rival armies, two competing systems of power, meeting on neutral ground. The men walking alongside Clodius's carriage feel a surge of collective confidence. They are the populars, the people's men. The gladiators marching with Milo feel a sense of professional duty. They are the protectors of the Senate and order. Both sides are primed by years of hatred and violence. They know each other by sight. They've probably fought each other before in some dirty alleyway in the sub-URA. And now, there's nowhere to run. The road is straight. The audience is made of stone tombs, and the leaders are watching. The moment hangs in the air, thick and heavy like the dust kicked up by the horses. The two processions are now acutely aware of each other. The boisterous chatter from Clodius's group fades slightly, replaced by a more watchful, tense silence. Milo's disciplined guards square their shoulders, their hands instinctively moving closer to the hilts of their swords. You are an invisible observer, standing by a weathered milestone that reads XI, 11 miles from Rome. From this vantage point, you see the whole scene unfold like a grim, inevitable play. Milo's carriage is in the lead of his party. He is sitting beside his wife, Foster. He is dressed for travel, not for a fight. He is heading home. He likely has no desire for a confrontation here. On an open road, miles from the strategic familiarity of Rome's street. His goal is the consulship, and a random, messy brawl on the Appian Way is an unnecessary risk. A clean win in the election is far preferable to a dirty fight in the dust. Clodius, on the other hand, is on horseback. This is a crucial detail that Cicero would later seize upon. He was reclining in a comfortable carriage. He was mounted, ready for action, or so the argument would go. He is at the head of his much larger group. He sees Milo's smaller party approaching. For a man like Clodius, a man whose entire political career is built on provocation and dominance, this is an opportunity. He has the numerical advantage. His rival is here, exposed, on his way back from some boring administrative task. The temptation must be immense. The road, while a marvel of engineering, is not as wide as a modern highway. It's wide enough for two carriages to pass, but it would be a tight squeeze, especially with dozens of people on foot crowding the edges. It forces a certain intimacy, a certain unavoidable proximity. They cannot simply ignore each other. The two leaders lock eyes. You can't hear what they say, or if they say anything at all. Perhaps it's just a nod, dripping with contempt. Perhaps it's a sneer. A silent exchange of the pure, unvarnished hatred that has defined their public lives for the past decade. Milo's carriage continues to roll forward, maintaining its steady, deliberate pace. He wants to pass and be done with it. Let the lesser men posture. He has bigger things to worry about. The front of Milo's procession, his carriage, his wife, his senior guards, actually passes Clodius himself. For a fleeting second, it seems like nothing will happen. It seems that, for once, maturity or at least self-preservation will prevail. The leaders have passed each other. The crisis point is over. You almost breathe a sigh of relief. But the danger in these situations is rarely with the leaders themselves. They are insulated by status and surrounded by bodyguards. The real friction happens at the edges, where the testosterone and bravado haven't been tempered by political calculation. The problem is with the men at the back. As the bulk of Milo's group continues past, his rear guard is now drawing level with the last of Clodius's sprawling entourage. This is the flashpoint. Here are the gladiators, the professional fighters hired by Milo, walking with a confident swagger. And here are Clodius's men, a mix of hired toughs and devoted followers, full of populist arrogance. They are the ones who have been fighting each other in the alleys of Rome. They are the ones with scores to settle, with personal grudges that have nothing to do with consular elections and everything to do with a broken nose from the last brawl. One of the fascinating and often overlooked aspects of Roman society was the concept of dignitas. It was a person standing, their honor, their public worth. While it was most important for senators, even a gladiator or a common thug had a version of it. To be seen backing down, To be insulted without retaliating was to lose face. And in a world built on reputation, losing face was something you couldn't afford. Historians debate whether the ensuing fight was a planned ambush or a spontaneous escalation, and this moment is the crux of that argument. Was there a secret signal from Clodius? Or was it just the inevitable result of putting two rival gangs, high on their own importance, within arm's reach of each other? You see it happen. A taunt is exchanged. They shove. Someone spits on the ground. It's impossible to say who started it. And in the end, it doesn't matter. It's like a spark landing in a pile of dry tinder. The simmering tension, held in check for a few brief moments, now explodes. The feud of the masters has become the fight of the men. The Queen of Rhodes is about to get a fresh coat of paint. The brawl starts exactly where you'd expect it, at the tail end of the two processions. It's not a coordinated charge, not a planned attack. It's a messy, chaotic eruption of violence. Imagine the sound. The sudden, sharp cry of anger that cuts through the afternoon quiet. The meaty thud of a club hitting a leather tunic. The scrape of sandals on the hard stone as men scramble for footing. Milo's rear guard, the last of his gladiators to pass, are the first to be involved. They are professionals, and they are outnumbered, but they are not easily intimidated. You see one of Clodius's men, maybe a zealous supporter, maybe just a hothead, step out and block the path of one of Milo's gladiators. Words are exchanged. Maybe it's an insult about Milo, calling him a tyrant. Maybe it's a more personal jibe, a comment on the gladiator's parentage. Whatever it is, it's the final straw. A fight breaks out between these few men at the back. It's a flurry of fists and kicks. Then someone draws a weapon. Not a sword, not yet. A heavy wooden club, the kind a Roman thug would carry for self-minus defense. A cudgel is swung, and someone goes down. The first blood is shed on the Appian Way. Now the two leaders, who had already passed each other, are forced to react. From his carriage, Milo looks back over his shoulder. He sees the commotion escalating behind him. His first instinct is likely irritation. He probably assumes it's just some routine posturing from Clodius's rebel. He shouts an order for his men to keep moving, to ignore it, to get back to Rome. The last thing he wants is to be drawn into this pointless roadside skirmish. Clodius, however, has a different reaction. Patrician on horseback, giving him a better view of the unfolding chaos. He sees his men engaging with Milo's rear guard. This is his element. He turns his horse and gallops back towards the fray. This is a critical moment. Was he riding back to break it up, to assert his authority as a candidate for praetor? Or was he riding back to lead the charge, to personally escalate the fight and humiliate his rival? His supporters would claim the former, his enemies, the latter. This single action would become a central point of contention in the trial to come. As Clodius rides back, the fight metastasizes. It's no longer a small scuffle. Men from both sides run towards the sound of the conflict, eager to join in. It's a full-blown melee now. You see Milo's gladiators forming a tight, defensive knot, using their professional training to fend off the more numerous but less organized attackers. Clodius's men swarm them, using their numbers to try and overwhelm them. Daggers are drawn. The glint of steel flashes in the Italian sun. Here's a small, weird detail about Roman combat. The preferred method of using a short sword, the gladius, was not slashing, but thrusting. It was a stabbing weapon. Slashing wounds looked dramatic but were often superficial. A deep thrust to the torso was far more lethal. The Roman legionary was trained to stab, and a gladiator would know this too. So the fighting you're witnessing is brutal, close minus quarters, and deadly serious. Historians are still somewhat divided on the exact sequence of events. The main source we have for this is Cicero's speech in defense of Milo, which is, of course, a deeply biased account. He paints a picture of Milo's men acting purely in self-defense against a premeditated ambush by Clodius. Other, more fragmentary sources suggest the blame was more evenly shared. This is the fog of history, where the truth lies somewhere between competing propaganda. The idea of an objective account from this period is a fantasy. Everyone had an angle. You see Clodius in the thick of it now. He.G.S. shouting, encouraging his men. He.G.S. a leader, and his presence electrifies his followers. They press their attack with renewed vigor. The small knot of Milo's men is in danger of being completely overrun. From his carriage, Milo sees that the situation is out of control. His men are being attacked, and their leader, Clodius, is personally directing the assault. His initial desire to avoid a fight is now irrelevant. He can't just abandon his men on the road. His own dignitas is at stake now. He gives an order. His remaining guards, the ones who were at the front with him, draw their swords and run back to help their comrades. Milo himself gets out of his carriage. The time for caution is over. The gang war has officially begun. The quiet road has become a battlefield. The chaos of the brawl intensifies. It's no longer a series of individual scuffles, but a swirling, desperate melee. The shouts of men are punctuated by the sickening clang of iron on bone and the grunts of pain. Dust kicked up from the road hangs in the air, mingling with the coppery scent of blood. In the midst of this, Clodius is fighting. H.E.S. a Patrician, an aristocrat, but H.E.S. no stranger to violence. H.E.S. right there with his men, a politician leading from the front. This is his brand. H.E.S. showing them that H.E.S. not just their patron, H.E.S. one of them. It's this very bravado, this need to be in the heart of the action, that proves to be his undoing. While his men are focused on the main group of Milo's gladiators, a few of Milo's fighters manage to circle around the edges of the fray. They are professionals, and they know the most effective way to end a fight. Take out the leader. They see Clodius, a high-value target, making himself conspicuous. A man named Buriae, one of Milo's most trusted gladiators, spots his chance. He pushes through the chaos, his eyes fixed on Clodius. He is not armed with a sword, but with a different kind of weapon, a short, heavy-bladed spear or javelin. It's a weapon designed for a single, powerful thrust. Before Clodius or his bodyguards can react, Buriae lunges forward. The spearhead, sharp and unforgiving, strikes Clodius in the shoulder. It's a serious blow. The iron punches through his tunic and deep into the flesh. Clodius cries out, a sharp gasp of shock and pain. The strength drains from him. He stumbles back, clutching at the wound as blood begins to soak his clothes. The sight of their leader falling throws into a momentary panic. The momentum of their attack falters. For a second, everyone seems to freeze, the reality of what just happened sinking in. This is no longer just a brawl. A major Roman political figure, a candidate for high office, a man whose body was supposed to be sacred when he was a tribune, has been gravely wounded. The line has been crossed. Clodius's closest attendants rush to his side. They see the blood, the spear wound, and the pained look on his face. Their priority is no longer winning the fight. It's saving their leader. They half-mind is scary. Half-mind is drag the wounded Clodius away from the heart of the melee. They need to get him to safety, to find a place where his wound can be treated. Their eyes scan the roadside. The Appian Way is mostly lined with tombs, silent and unhelpful. But just a short distance from the site of the brawl, there is a small building. It's a coupone, a roadside inn or tavern. These places were common along major Roman roads, providing food, drink, and basic lodging for travelers. They also had a notoriously seedy reputation. They were often frequented by the lower classes, were considered dirty, and were sometimes fronts for other less savory activities. It's one of those interesting little facts of Roman life that upper-class Romans like Clodius would generally avoid these places at all costs, preferring to stay at the private villas of friends. But wait now, this dingy tavern is a sanctuary. It's the only shelter available. Clodius's men hustle him towards it. The innkeeper, seeing a bleeding nobleman and his gang of armed thugs descending on his establishment, probably doesn't have much choice in the matter. They burst through the door and carry Clodius inside, laying him down on a rough wooden table or a cot, desperately trying to tend to his wound. Back on the road, the dynamic of the fight has completely changed. Clodius's men are now leaderless and disorganized. Some of them have followed him into the inn, while others are left outside, confused and angry. Milone's men, seeing their advantage, press the attack. They are no longer just defending themselves. They are now on the offensive, driving the remaining members of Clodius's gang back. Milo stands by his carriage, watching all of this unfold. The fight seems to be over. His men have won. The enemy leader is wounded and hiding in a common tavern. He has a choice to make. He can call his men off, get back in his carriage, and return to Rome, claiming a clear victory in self-defense. Or he can finish it. The decision he makes in the next few moments will seal his fate and send a shockwave through the entire Roman Republic. The fighting on the road dies down. The remaining members of Clodius's gang, without their leader and seeing the fight is turned against them, begin to scatter. Some flee into the surrounding fields. Others make a break for it back down the road towards Nuvia. Milo's gladiators, professional and disciplined, don't give chase. They regroup around their master, their adrenaline still high, their weapons stained. The immediate threat is gone. Milo stands there, in the middle of the Appian Way, surrounded by the debris of the skirmish. He looks at his own men. They, too, are wounded, but none seriously. He then looks at the tavern, the shabby little building where his mortal enemy is now cornered and bleeding. A heavy silence falls over the scene, broken only by the groans of the injured and the nervous panting of horses. This is the pivotal moment. History holds its breath. Inside the tavern, Clodius is in a bad way. His followers are crowded around him, panicked and useless. They are political brawlers, not medics. They don't know how to treat a deep spear wound. They can see HES in immense pain and losing a lot of blood. But he is alive. Outside, Milo confers with his lieutenants. You can imagine the conversation. What do we do now? The options are laid out. Option 1. Leave. The fight is won. Clodius is wounded, humiliated, and trapped in a filthy inn. Milo can return to Rome immediately, find Cicero, and craft the perfect narrative. We were ambushed on the road by Clodius and his thugs. We defended ourselves bravely. By the grace of the gods, we survived and drove them off. Clodius himself was wounded in the assault he started. It's a clean story. It makes Milo look like the victim, the man of order who reluctantly but successfully defended himself against the agent of chaos. It's the smart political move. Option 2. Finish it. This is where the debate among historians becomes incredibly intense, because it gets to the heart of Milo's state of mind. Was what happened next a calculated decision by Milo, or was it a spontaneous act by his enraged men that he simply failed to stop? Cicero, in his defense, would claim the latter. He would argue that Milo's men, enraged that Clodius was still alive after launching such a treacherous ambush, acted on their own initiative, driven by a righteous fury. They were, in his words, acting as loyal servants, and their actions can be blamed on their master. But other accounts suggest Milo was far more complicit. The argument for a deliberate decision is powerful. Clodius is wounded, but he is still alive. A wounded Clodius is still a dangerous Clodius. He will recover, and when he does, his thirst for revenge will be biblical. He will use this incident to whip the people of Rome into a frenzy. He will portray himself as a martyr who was nearly assassinated by the hired killers of the aristocracy. The political fallout could destroy Milo's consular campaign and possibly his life. A living Clodius remains a mortal threat. A dead Clodius, on the other hand, a dead Clodius is just a problem. A big problem, to be sure, but a finite one. A problem that can be managed with lawyers and politics and money. A dead rival can't seek revenge. Someone in Milo's inner circle, perhaps Milo himself, perhaps one of his senior gladiators, voices the cold, brutal logic of the situation. If you do a thing, do it completely. Or as one source phrases the sentiment, a dead enemy is a good enemy. The decision is made. It's a chilling, pragmatic calculation. The risk of letting him live is greater than the risk of killing him. It's also a moment that highlights a strange and somewhat morbid quirk of Roman elite thinking. While they had complex laws, they also had an undercurrent of old-fashioned, almost tribal, honor culture. The idea of the justified killing of a public enemy hostess was a concept that people like Milo and his supporters could rationalize. In their minds, Clodius was just a political opponent. He was a pest, a plague on the Republic. And sometimes, you have to take extreme measures to deal with a plague. Milo gives the order. Or, perhaps, he simply doesn't give the order to stop. In the morally ambiguous world of Roman politics, the distinction is almost meaningless. His gladiators, seeing their master's intent, turn their attention to the tavern. They are no longer a defensive force. They are now an execution squad. They stride towards the flimsy door of the inn, their faces grim, their purpose clear. The decision has been made. There is no turning back. The scene shifts from the open road to the dark, cramped interior of the tavern. The air inside is stale, smelling of cheap wine, sweat, and now, fear. Clodius is lying on a rough hewn bench, his face pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His attendants are trying to staunch the bleeding with strips of cloth torn from their tunics, but they are clumsy and panicked. Then comes the splintering crash of the door being forced open. Milo's gladiators fill the doorway, blotting out the afternoon light. They are silhouetted against the bright sun, their forms imposing and terrifying. To the men inside, they must look like demons from the underworld. The few of Clodius's followers who had stayed with him are frozen in terror. They are not professional fighters. They are political hangers on, and they are no match for what is about to happen. There's no negotiation. No final words are exchanged. This is not a duel. It's an execution. The gladiators storm the small room. Clodius's attendants are either shoved aside, cut down, or they scramble out of the way, trying to save their own skins. They abandon their leader in his final moments. Milo's men surround the bench where Clodius lies. He is wounded, helpless, and at their mercy. He looks up at the faces of his rivals and forcers. What he felt in that moment, fear, rage, defiance, is lost to history. The final blow is swift and brutal. The gladiators fall upon him with their swords. There is no honor in it, no pretense of a fair fight. They stab him repeatedly, ensuring the job is done. Publius Clodius Pulcher, the Patrician who became a Pleb, the champion of the people, the master of chaos, breathes his last on the dirty floor of a cheap roadside inn. The gladiators step back, their work complete. The tavern is silent again, except for the dripping sound of blood. They have followed their orders. The threat has been eliminated. They drag the body out of the dark tavern and back into the sunlight of the Appian Way. For a moment, they seem unsure what to do with it. This is not some anonymous bandit. This is one of the most famous men in Rome. You can't just dig a hole. They simply leave him. They drop the corpse of Clodius onto the stone pavement of the road, right there in the dust and grime, and walk away. They rejoin Milo, who's been waiting by his carriage, the detached manager of a grim business transaction. The deed is done. Milo's party reforms. They are quieter now. The fiery energy of the fight has been replaced by a cold, sober reality. They get back in their carriages, mount their horses, and continue their journey north to Rome, leaving the body of their enemy lying on the ancient road. And there he lies, alone. His fine clothes are torn and soaked in blood. His face, which had charmed and enraged the city, is slack and empty. The once mighty gang leader is now just a piece of carrion on the highway. It's a profoundly ignominious end for a man who had commanded the loyalty of tens of thousands. This is a detail that always strikes me as particularly haunting: the abandonment. In a society that placed immense importance on proper burial rites, leaving a body exposed on a public road was an act of supreme contempt. It was a final, posthumous humiliation. It denied him the dignity of a proper transition to the afterlife, a concept the Romans took very seriously. This was just murder. It was a statement. For some time, the body lies there undisturbed. Travelers on the road, seeing the corpse of a wealthy man and the lingering signs of a violent struggle, would have hurried past, wanting no involvement. But the Appian Way was a major artery. It was only a matter of time before someone of consequence came along. Late in the afternoon, another carriage approaches, this one also heading towards Rome. Inside is a senator named Sextus Dedius. H.E.S., not a major political player, just a man of decent standing heading home. He sees the body lying in the road. He orders his driver to stop. He gets out and, to his horror, recognizes the famous face of Clodius Pulcher. Realizing the magnitude of what has happened, Dedius makes a fateful decision. He knows he cannot just leave the body there. It is his duty as a Roman and a senator. He orders his servants to lift the corpse and place it in his own litter, a covered couch carried by slaves. It's a brave act, one that inextricably links into the events that are about to unfold. With its grim cargo, Dedius's litter continues its journey. It arrives in Rome after dark, carrying not a living senator, but the body of a murdered politician. The destination is Clodius's own grand house on the Palatine Hill, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. The news is about to break. A spark has been lit on the Appian Way, and it's about to ignite a fire that will consume the heart of Rome. The arrival of the body at Clodius's house is not a quiet affair. Imagine the scene. A senator's litter, arriving late at night, carried by a solemn minus-faced slave. The servants of the house come out, expecting perhaps a late visitor. Instead, the curtains of the litter are drawn back to reveal the bloody, lifeless form of their master. The news spreads like a virus, first through the household, then out into the night. A wail of grief from a slave, a shouted order, a servant running to fetch a relative. The information leaps from the exclusive confines of the Palatine Hill down into the crowded, noisy streets of the city below. Clodius JSTOR. Clodius is killed. The message travels through the dark alleys of the sub-URA, the sprawling, densely populated slum where many of Clodius's most ardent supporters live. It's whispered in taverns, shouted across tenement courtyards. At first, it's just a rumor, a shocking piece of gossip. But it's quickly confirmed. The body is real. It is lying in his own home. And he was killed by Milo. The second part of the news travels just as fast as the first. No one has any doubt who is responsible. The feud was public knowledge. Milo and his gladiators were seen on the same road. The story writes itself. Rome at night is a different city. During the day, it's a place of commerce and law, the forum bustling with senators in white to gas. At night, it belongs to the people. The wealthy are shuttered in their well-guarded homes. The streets are dark, unlit, and dangerous. And tonight, they are electric with rage. Groups of people begin to gather spontaneously. A handful of men in a tavern become a dozen, then 100. They pour out into the narrow streets, their torches casting flickering, angry shadows on the high walls of the apartment blocks. They ensure. The mood is not one of grief, not yet. It is one of pure, unadulterated fury. Their champion, their protector, the man who gave them free grain, has been assassinated. It's not just a murder, it's an attack on them. The aristocrats, the wealthy senators, the optimates that Clodius fought against, they have finally done it. They have murdered the people's friend. This is a perfect illustration of the class tension that was tearing the Republic apart. For the wealthy elite, Clodius was a menace, a threat to stability. For the urban poor, he was their only voice. His murder wasn't a political event. It was a declaration of war by the rich against the poor. Whether this was true or not was irrelevant. This was the perception, and in a city like Rome, perception was reality. The crowd swills. It's a leaderless, organic movement fueled by raw emotion. They have a destination in mind, Clodius's house. They surge up the winding roads leading to the Palatine Hill, a river of torches and angry shouts. They want to see. They need to bear witness. When the crowd arrives, they find the doors to the house have been thrown open. The body of Clodius has been laid out in the atrium, the grand central hall of his Roman mansion. It's been cleaned, but the wounds are deliberately left visible. This is a calculated act of political theater, and it is brutally effective. People file into the house, a procession of the common folk of Rome. They see their leader, not as a powerful politician, but as a butchered victim. They see the multiple stab wounds, the evidence of a merciless killing. The sight pours fuel on the fire of their rage. The grief begins to set in now, mingling with the anger, creating a volatile, explosive emotional cocktail. Grown men weep openly. Women cry out in mourning. The sound fills the grand house and spills out into the packed square outside. This is where historical accounts differ slightly on the details, but the overall picture is clear. The crowd needed a focal point, a voice to channel their rage. Two other tribunes of the plebs, both allies of Clodius, quickly arrive on the scene. They understand the power of this moment. They climb onto a high place and begin to address the crowd. Their speeches are not calls for calm or for justice through the courts. They are inflammatory eulogies, designed to incite the mob to immediate action. They point to the wounds. They name Milone as the killer, and they blame the entire Senate for creating the climate that allowed it to happen. The city is a powder keg. The murder was the spark. The public display of the body was the kindling. The inflammatory speeches of the tribunes are the gust of wind that will turn this spark into an inferno. The night is still young, and the mob, now thousands strong, is unified in its grief and rage. They are ready to tear the city apart, and they are about to find a truly spectacular way to do it. As the first rays of dawn streak the sky over Rome, the scene at Clodius's house has reached a fever pitch. The crowd has been there all night, their anger and grief stewing into a potent brew. They need a catalyst, a figure to crystallize their emotion into action. And she appears. Enter Fulvia. Fulvia is Clodius's wife, now his widow. And if you think Clodius was a force of nature, you haven't met Fulvia. She is one of the most formidable and politically active women in Roman history, a figure who deserves a story all her own. She was not the traditional, demure Roman matron who stayed at home managing the household. She was deeply involved in her husband's political career, a partner in his ambitions, and a fierce political operator in her own right. She came from a family of plebeian nobles with a history of populist politics. This was her third marriage to a powerful, controversial man. She understood power, and she understood how to use public sentiment as a weapon. She emerges before the crowd, a picture of dramatic, theatrical grief. But this is not the quiet sorrow of a private loss. This is a public performance of devastating skill. She holds nothing back. She weeps. She tears at her hair. She beats her chest in the traditional Roman manner of mourning. Her cries of anguish are not just for her dead husband. They are for the people, for their lost champion. And then, she presents the body. The corpse of Clodius is brought out of the house and placed on a litter in the full view of the seething crowd. Fulvia doesn't just show them the body. She curates the experience. She points to each wound, her voice rising with rage and sorrow. See what they have done. She cries. See how the rich repay the man who gave you bread. See the savagery of Milo and his masters in the Senate. She lifts his bloody tunic for all to see, a tangible symbol of the brutal murder. It's an act of pure political genius, a precursor to Mark Antony, famously doing the same with Caesar's toga years later. She is turning her personal tragedy into a public rallying cry. She is not just a grieving widow. She is the high priestess of revenge. One of the fascinating tidbits about Roman funerals, especially for the elite, is how public and performative they were. A funeral procession for a great man would include actors wearing wax masks images of his famous ancestors, connecting the deceased to a long line of Roman glory. While this isn't a formal funeral yet, Fulvia is tapping into that same tradition of public display. She is ensuring that Clodius's death is not a private affair to be quietly investigated, but a public spectacle that demands an immediate, visual response. Historians have long debated Fulvia's role. Was her grief genuine? Almost certainly. She and Clodius were, by all accounts, a close and effective partnership. But was she also a shrewd political actor using that genuine grief for maximum political impact? Absolutely. The two are not mutually exclusive. She knew that the raw emotion of this moment was a fleeting resource. It had to be harnessed now, before the Senate could regain control of the narrative, before Milo's lawyers could start spinning their tale of self-minus defense. She is fighting for her husband's legacy and for the future of their political faction. The effect on the crowd is electric. Seeing the weeping widow and the mutilated body of their hero transforms their anger into a righteous crusade. They are no longer just a mob. They are an instrument of justice, or what passes for it on the streets of Rome. The two friendly tribunes, Pompeius Rufus and Manetius Plancius, seize the moment. They direct the crowd to carry the litter bearing Clodius's body. But they don't take it to a cemetery. They have a much more symbolic destination in mind. They lead the procession down from the Palatine Hill and into the very heart of the Republic. The Roman Forum. The Forum is the sacred center of Roman life. It's where laws are made, where justice is dispensed, where the Senate meets. It is the symbol of Roman order and tradition. And this enraged, grieving mob is now marching on it, carrying the corpse of a murdered populist as their standard. They are taking their outrage to the doorstep of the establishment they hold responsible. The sun is rising on a new day in Rome, and that day is going to begin with an act of revolutionary desecration. The procession floods into the Roman Forum. This is not the Forum you see in pristine documentary reconstructions. This is a living, breathing, Tyndale, screaming space. It's surrounded by ancient temples, the rostra, the speaker's platform, and the basilicas, which were not churches but grand public halls for law courts and business. And at one end of the forum stands the most important building of all, the Curia Hostilia, the Senate House. This was the large, marble minus-clad Curia Julia that Caesar would later build and that partially stands today. The Curia Hostilia was a more ancient, venerable, and symbolic structure. It was, quite literally, the room where the Roman Republic happened. For centuries, the Senate had met within its walls to debate the fate of the world. It was the physical embodiment of the authority of the Optimates, the very group the mob blamed for Clodius's death. And it's towards this building that the tribunes direct the angry crowd. They place the litter with Clodius's body directly in front of the Senate House. The two tribunes, Plancius and Rufus, climb the steps and deliver another round of fiery speeches to the massive crowd that now fills the entire forum. They whip the people into a frenzy, their voices echoing off the stone temples. They declare that Clodius, a man of the people, deserves a funeral pyre worthy of a king. And what could be a more fitting pyre than the very den of his enemies? The idea catches like wildfire. It is a breathtakingly radical and destructive suggestion. A collective madness seems to seize the crowd. They are no longer just protesters. They are destroyers. They are about to commit an act of sacrilege against the state itself. They storm the Curia. The bronze doors are forced open. The mob swarms inside. They see the benches where the senators sat, the tribunal where the presiding magistrate would speak. They begin to rip the place apart. They smash the wooden benches, the chairs, the tables, anything that will burn. They pile the wreckage up in the center of the hallowed hall. They are building a pyre from the very furniture of government. This act is so extreme it's worth pausing to consider. It's the equivalent of a modern mob burning down the Capitol building or the Houses of Parliament to make a funeral pyre for a politician. It is an attack on the very idea of the state. Historians are still staggered by the sheer audacity of it. Was this a spontaneous act of mob rage, or was it cleverly orchestrated by the tribunes who knew exactly what they were doing? It's a classic chicken minus and minus egg question of revolutionary moments. The leaders feed the mob's anger, and the mob's actions, in turn, embolden the leaders to push things even further. Once the pyre is built high with the smashed remnants of the Senate's furniture, they need to add the final, sacred element. They bring in the litter bearing Clodius's body and place it on top of the heap of splintered wood. Then, someone brings a torch. The pyre is lit. Flames lick at the dry wood, then roar to life. The fire consumes the benches, the records, and the body of Clodius Pulcher. But it doesn't stop there. The blaze is immense, far too large for the confines of the building. The flames leap up to the wooden ceiling of the ancient curia. The roof catches fire. The building itself begins to burn. The crowd pours back out into the forum to watch. They have turned the Senate House of the Roman Republic into a funeral pyre for their fallen hero. The building is completely consumed by the inferno. The flames leap to the adjoining Basilica Borgia, another ancient and respected public building, and it too catches fire and burns to the ground. The heart of Rome is on fire. The smoke, thick and black, billows into the sky, a signal of anarchy visible from every one of the city's 7 hills. The mob, its work of sacred destruction complete, does not disperse. Empowered by their success, they are just getting started. They have destroyed the symbol of the Senate's power. Now, they will go after the senators themselves. Armed with torches plucked from the great fire, they split off into smaller groups and begin to hunt. Their primary target is the man they hold responsible, Milone. But any known supporter of his will do. The riot has begun. The fire in the forum is not a contained thing. It's a ravenous beast. Embers, carried by the wind, drift over the city, a shower of angry orange sparks against the dark sky. The smell of smoke is everywhere, a thick, acrid blanket that stings your eyes and catches in the back of your throat. The steady, respectable heart of the Republic has been transformed into a raging bonfire, and the heat from its core has set the city as temper ablaze. With the curia in ruins, the mob's objective shifts. Their grief has been expressed. Now their anger needs a target. A wave of torches and fury surges away from the forum, climbing the Palatine Hill toward the grand houses of the elite. Their first and most obvious destination is the home of Titus Annius Milo. Milo, ever the prepared host for this sort of social call, is ready for them. You have to understand, a Roman aristocrat's house, a domus, was not like a modern suburban home with large, inviting windows. It was a fortress. It presented a sheer, intimidating wall to the street, with few, if any, ground-minus floor windows. The main entrance was a single, heavy, reinforced door. Inside this protective shell, life was lived around the central open-air courtyard, the atrium. It was designed for privacy and, when necessary, for defense. When the mob arrives at Milo's house, they find the doors barred and the walls manned. Milo's private army of gladiators, fresh from their victory on the Appian Way, are now deployed as a garrison. The crowd throws torches onto the roof, hoping to set it alight. They hurl stones and insults. From the upper floors and the roof, Milo's men rain down tiles and projectiles on the attackers below. It's a siege. The street in front of the mansion becomes a battlefield, a chaotic scene of futile assault and grim defense. Milo is trapped in his home, but the mob cannot get to him. Frustrated but not defeated, the mob seeks other targets. They descend on the house of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. This is a particularly audacious attack. Lepidus was not just any senator. At this specific moment, he was the intrigues. This was an ancient office, revived only in times of crisis when both consuls were dead or, as in this case, had not yet been elected. The intrigues was the acting head of state, the placeholder of supreme authority, responsible for overseeing the very elections Clodius and Milo were fighting over. Attacking him was a direct assault on the last shred of legitimate government in Rome. The mob besieges his house as well. Lepidus, less prepared for a full minus-scale assault than Milo, is dragged out into the street. He is terrified, but they don't kill him. They subject him to a different kind of violence, humiliation. They tear his official robes and hold him hostage for hours, a symbol of their utter contempt for the Senate and its authority. Now, how widespread was this anarchy? This is where the historical sources get a bit hazy, and it's a topic of academic debate. Was the entire city of 1 million people in a state of total collapse, with random violence on every corner, as some of the more dramatic accounts would have you believe? Or was the violence more surgical and politically targeted? Many modern historians lean toward the latter. They argue that the mob, while genuinely enraged, was also being directed by Clodius's political allies, the tribunes Plancius and Rufus. The targets were in random. They were specific. They attacked Milo, the murderer. They attacked Lepidus, the representative of a dysfunctional government. They burned the Curia, the symbol of the Senate. It was chaos, but it was chaos with a purpose. It was political theater on a terrifyingly grand scale, designed to show that the state could no longer function without the faction of the fallen Clodius. Regardless of the interpretation, the result is the same. The government of Rome has completely ceased to function. There are no consuls. The acting head of state has been publicly humiliated. The Senate House is a smoldering ruin. The forum, the heart of the city, is a no-minus-go zone controlled by an angry mob. No magistrate dares to show his face in public. The courts are closed. All business has ground to a halt. The city is paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The senators, hiding in their homes, are terrified. They listen to the sounds of the mob outside, and they understand that they have lost control completely. The system has failed. The Republic's traditional institutions have proven utterly incapable of dealing with the crisis. They need a solution, and they need it now. And in the late Roman Republic, when the system broke down and chaos reigned, there was a familiar, if dangerous, Pleb. You didn't turn to a committee or a debate. You turned to a great man, a man with a victorious army, a man with enough personal prestige and power to impose order by force. The Senate, in its panic, is about to make a deal with the devil. They are about to hand the keys of the city to the most powerful man in Rome. The chaos cannot hold. Rome, the capital of a vast empire, cannot remain in a state of leaderless anarchy. The senators, barricaded in their homes, know this. The respectable citizens, tired of the riots and the smell of smoke, know this. Even the mob, its initial fury spent, is beginning to lose its coherence. The city is holding its breath, waiting for someone to step into the power vacuum. And all eyes turn to one man. His name is Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. Pompey the Great. At this moment, Pompey is not some obscure politician. He is, arguably, the most famous and powerful man in the world. He is a military hero on an almost mythical scale. He had cleared the entire Mediterranean of pirates in a stunningly rapid campaign. He had conquered vast territories in the east, defeating kings and adding immense wealth and new provinces to the Roman Empire. His victories had been so spectacular that he had been granted 3 separate triumphs, the highest military honor a Roman could achieve. His veterans were settled on lands throughout Italy, fiercely loyal to their old general. He possessed immense wealth, vast political influence after it as, and, crucially, he was stationed just outside the city of Rome with a proconsular command, which meant he legally had an army at his beck and call. For the past few years, he had been part of an informal, uneasy alliance with 2 other political giants, the immensely wealthy Marcus Licinius Crassus and the rising star, Julius Caesar. This alliance, known to historians as the First Triumvirate, had effectively controlled Roman politics behind the scenes. But by 50 BC, the triumvirate was fraying. Crassus had been killed in a disastrous campaign in Parthia. Caesar was away in Gaul, busy conquering a whole new chunk of Europe. But his staggering success was making many in the Senate nervous. That left Pompey. He was in Italy. He had the troops. And he had the prestige. The Senate was terrified of him. They saw him as a potential dictator, another Sulla who might march on Rome and impose his will. But right now, they were more terrified of the mob. In a classic case of political desperation, they chose the devil they knew. They needed a strong man to restore order, and Pompey was the only candidate. Led by conservative stalwarts like Cato the Younger, who was Pompey's bitter political enemy but a pragmatist in a crisis, the Senate passed an emergency decree, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum. This was the Roman Republic's panic button, a declaration that the state was in mortal danger, which gave magistrates extraordinary powers. But they went a step further. They did something unprecedented in Roman history. They appointed Pompey as consul sine collega, consul without a colleague. This was a shocking break with tradition. The consulship was the supreme office, but its power was always checked by the fact that there were 2 consuls, each with the power to veto the other. A sole consul was effectively a king, a dictator in all but name. This is a subtle but crucial point of historical debate. Why didn't they just name him dictator, an established emergency office? Some historians suggest that the title dictator had been so tainted by Sulla's bloody prescriptions that it was politically toxic. Sole consul sounded softer, more republican, even though it granted much the same power. It was a legal fiction to make an autocracy more palatable. Pompey, who had been waiting just outside the city, masterfully playing hard to get, accepted the honor. He marched his troops into Rome to secure the streets. The sight of disciplined, armed legionaries was enough to quell the riots. The mob, which had seemed so formidable against unarmed senators, melted away in the face of professional soldiers. Order, or at least the appearance of it, was restored. Now as sole consul, Pompey's first job was to deal with the reason for the crisis, the murder of Clodius. He had to bring Milone to justice, but this couldn't be a normal trial. The city was too polarized. A regular court would be subject to intimidation and bribery. Pompey needed to make a statement. He needed to show that the new order, his order, was in charge. So he passed a series of new laws specifically for this situation. When the Divine Violence created a special new court, a quaestorium, to investigate the brawl on the Appian Way and the subsequent riots. Another law streamlined the trial process itself. It limited the time for speeches, cutting down on the potential for soaring, emotional oratory. Most controversially, it changed the rules for witnesses. The witnesses would be heard first, over several days, before the closing arguments from the prosecution and defense. This was a radical departure from the norm, and it was designed to prevent a brilliant lawyer from twisting the evidence with a last-minute masterful speech. Everything was being carefully staged minus managed. Pompey was not just seeking justice. He was engineering a specific outcome. He needed to show the people that Clodius's death would be avenged, but he also needed to bring the aristocratic street fighter Milo to heel. He was trying to placate both sides while consolidating his own power. The stage was now set for one of the most famous trials in Roman history, a trial that would take place in a city occupied by soldiers, under the watchful eye of its new, powerful ruler. The trial of Milo is not going to be held in a quiet, oak-paneled courtroom. The entire process is a piece of political theater, designed by Pompey to project an image of overwhelming authority and a return to iron-fisted justice. The setting itself is a message. Pompey establishes a special tribunal, a quaestio extraordinari, to hear the case. This isn't a standard court with a standard jury. Pompey himself hand-speaks the panel of jurors, while he selects them from the usual pool of senators, equestrians, and treasury tribunes to maintain a veneer of fairness. Everyone in Rome knows that the men selected are chosen for their loyalty or their susceptibility to pressure. The presiding judge is Lucius Domitius Barbus, a staunch conservative who, despite his political leanings, is known to be under Pompey's influence. From the very beginning, the deck is stacked. The trial is held in the Roman Forum, which has been cleared of debris from the fire but still bears the scars of the recent riots. The ruins of the Curia stand as a grim backdrop, a constant reminder of the chaos that led to this moment. But the most significant feature of the scene is the security. Pompey, taking no chances, surrounds the forum with his soldiers. Not just a few guards at the entrances, but ranks of armed legionaries, standing shoulder to shoulder, forming a human wall around the entire trial area. Their polished helmets and spear points glitter in the sun. They are silent, disciplined, and utterly intimidating. This is Pompey's new rule of law, and it comes at the point of a sword. This military presence serves a dual purpose. On the one hand, it's a genuine security measure. Pompey needs to prevent Clodius's remaining supporters from turning the trial into another riot. He needs to protect the jurors, the lawyers, and the defendant from mob violence. On the other hand, it's a powerful act of psychological warfare. The message to everyone involved, jurors, witnesses, lawyers, is crystal clear. I, Pompey, am in charge. The old games of intimidation and mob rule are over. The only intimidation that matters now is mine. For Milo, this is a disaster. His entire political career was built on the power of his own gang. He was a master of using street pressure to influence outcomes. But now, his gang is useless. They can't get anywhere near the forum. He has been stripped of his primary weapon. He is now just a man in a toga, facing a court that is controlled by the one man in Rome more powerful than himself. There is also the matter of the trial structure, which Pompey's new law, the Lex Pompei Divi, had so carefully redesigned. The process was to be swift. Witnesses would be interrogated for 3 days. Then, there would be a 1-day break. On the 5th and final day, the prosecution would have 2 hours to make its closing argument, and the defense would have 3 hours. That was it. No long winded speeches, no dramatic filibustering, no calling of surprise witnesses at the last minute. It was a legal machine designed for speed and efficiency, and it heavily favored the prosecution. This quick fire structure was particularly damaging for the defense. Normally, a Roman defense lawyer would weave the testimony of witnesses into his closing speech, calling them up as he went, using their evidence to build a compelling narrative. Under Pompey's new rules, The witness testimony would be a cold, days minus old record by the time the defense lawyer got to speak. He wouldn't be able to build momentum or use a witness's lived presence to sway the jury. This is a subtle point, but one that legal historians find fascinating. The trial was a clash between two different concepts of justice. The traditional Roman model was messy, emotional, and heavily reliant on rhetoric and character. Who you were often mattered more than what you did. Pompey's special court was an attempt to create something more modern, more controlled, more focused on a pre-determined outcome. It was a show trial, but a very sophisticated one. The academic debate here isn't about whether the trial was fair. It clearly wasn't, but rather about Pompey's motivations. Was he a cynical autocrat ensuring the conviction of a political nuisance? Or was he a genuine, if heavy-minded handed, reformer trying to scrub the corruption and violence out of the Roman legal system? Perhaps he was both. He likely believed that convicting Milo was, in fact, good for the Republic, and he was willing to bend every rule to make sure that good thing happened. So you have a scene. A defendant stripped of his power. A court surrounded by soldiers. A jury of picked men. And a set of rules designed to stifle the defense. It all seems hopeless. But Milo has one last card to play. He is a wealthy man, and he can afford the best legal help in the world. He is about to hire a man whose name was synonymous with Roman oratory, the one person who might just be able to snatch victory from the jaws of this carefully constructed trap. Faced with a rigged court and the iron will of Pompey, Milo does the only thing he can. He calls for the biggest gun in Rome's legal arsenal. He hires Marcus Tullius Cicero. To say Cicero was a good lawyer is like saying Julius Caesar was a decent general. Cicero was the standard by which all other Roman orators were measured. His speeches were studied in schools for centuries after his death. His command of the Latin language was so profound that he is credited with shaping it into the vehicle for philosophical and rhetorical thought that we know today. In a society where public speaking was the single most important skill for a successful career, Cicero was the undisputed master. His style was legendary. He could be witty and charming, savagely sarcastic, or deeply emotional. He was an expert at character assassination, at painting his opponents as depraved villains while presenting his clients as paragons of virtue. He understood the psychology of a jury better than anyone. He knew how to play on their fears, their prejudices, and their sense of Roman duty. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a performer, and the courtroom was his stage. But Cicero's relationship with this case is deeply personal. He is not just a hired gun. He owes Milo an immense debt of loyalty. You have to remember what happened a few years earlier. After Clodius had become tribune, his primary political project was revenge, and his number one target was Cicero. Clodius passed a law that retroactively outlawed the execution of Roman citizens without a trial. This was aimed squarely at Cicero, who, during his own consulship, had ordered the execution of several conspirators in the Catilinarian plot. Faced with prosecution and the constant threat of violence from Clodius's gangs, Cicero was forced to flee Rome and live in exile. His house on the Palatine was burned down by Clodius's mob, and his property was confiscated. It was the lowest point of his life. Who was instrumental in getting him back? Milo, as tribune himself the following year, fought fire with fire. He used his own gangs to combat Clodius's gangs. He championed Cicero's cause in the Senate and in the streets. He physically fought to have the decree of exile repealed. When Cicero was finally recalled to Rome in a triumphant return, he knew he owed his political resurrection, and perhaps his life, to Milo's steadfast, violent support. Milo had been his bulldog, his protector, the man who had faced down the monster Clodius on his behalf. So now, Cicero is not just defending a client. He is defending his friend, his political ally, his savior. He is morally, politically, and personally bound to this case. He believes, or at least he has to argue, that Milo's actions on the Appian Way were a continuation of this long fight against the forces of chaos that Clodius represented. He sees this trial as the final battle in the war between order and anarchy, between the republic he loved and the demagoguery that was destroying it. There's a fascinating, almost tragic irony here. Cicero was a man of law and words. He believed that the republic should be governed by debate, reason, and respect for tradition. Yet, to survive, he had become dependent on a man of violence and thuggery. This is a tension that historians love to explore. Did Cicero genuinely approve of Milo's methods, seeing them as a necessary evil? Or did he secretly find them distasteful but was forced to accept them out of political necessity? His own writings are, perhaps deliberately, ambiguous on this point. He praises Milo as a patriot, but he never quite celebrates the street miners fighting itself. He was a man caught between his ideals and the brutal reality of late Republican politics. As he prepares for the trial, Cicero knows the challenge ahead. He cannot win on the facts alone. The fact is, Milo's men killed Clodius. That is undeniable. His only hope is to reframe the entire event. He must convince the jury that this was not a murder, but a justifiable homicide. He needs to construct a narrative so powerful, so emotionally resonant, that it can overcome the stacked deck, the intimidating soldiers, and the will of Pompey himself. He plans to deliver the speech of his life. To Milone, for Milo will be his masterpiece, a soaring defense of his friend and a final, damning indictment of the dead Clodius. The stage is set for a clash between the power of the sword, represented by Pompey, and the power of the word, wielded by Cicero. The trial begins. The first 3 days are dedicated to the testimony of witnesses, as per Pompey's new rules. The prosecution goes first, laying out its case with a simple, brutal, and effective narrative. This was a premeditated ambush into cold-blooded murder. The prosecutors are a team, but the most prominent are 2 young men, Publius Clodius Pulcher, the elder brother of the dead Clodius, seeking family revenge, on Mark Antony. Yes, that Mark Antony, the future tree of Mars and lover of Cleopatra. At this point, he is a young, ambitious politician, and a protege of the Claudian faction. He is making a name for himself as a forceful and effective speaker. Their story unfolds, witness by witness. They call travelers who were on the Appian Way that day. They call servants from the tavern. They call some of Clodius's men who escaped the brawl. Each testimony is designed to build a damning picture of Milo's intentions. Their argument goes something like this. Look at the facts. Milo was traveling with a huge entourage of armed gladiators. Why would a man on a simple trip home from Lanuvium need such a private army? Unless he was planning something. He was wearing heavy traveling clothes and was inside a carriage with his wife. He was, they argue, trying to create the impression that he was unprepared, setting a trap. Clodius, on the other hand, was on horseback, lightly armed, with a rowdy but not overtly military escort that included boys and singing slaves. He was, they claim, on a legitimate political trip, unburdened by the kind of heavy security that would suggest he was expecting a fight. The prosecution paints a picture of Clodius as the unsuspecting victim, ambushed on the open road. They focus heavily on the events at the tavern. They argue that the initial fight might have been a chaotic scuffle, but the decision to storm the inn and kill a wounded man was a separate, deliberate act of murder. This washed self-minus defense. This was an execution. They describe in lurid detail how Clodius was dragged out and butchered. They emphasize the ignominy of leaving his body on the road, an act of supreme arrogance and cruelty. The prosecutors are not just arguing the facts. They are playing to the crowd and to the political climate. Their key audience is not just the jury, but the people of Rome and Pompey himself. They frame the murder as an assault on the people. Milo, the aristocrat, the gang leader of the rich, has murdered the champion of the poor. They skillfully connect the murder to the subsequent riots. The burning of the Curia, they imply, was not an act of mindless mob violence, but a natural and understandable outpouring of grief and rage from a populace whose hero had been stolen from them. They are trying to make a conviction of Milo a political necessity for restoring peace to the city. One of the interesting things about Roman courts is that character attacks, or viat oppi ratio, were a standard and expected part of the legal process. The prosecutors spend a great deal of time painting Milo as a man of violence, a perpetual troublemaker, a man with a history of using his gangs to disrupt the state. They list his past violent acts, his brawls, his intimidation of public officials. Their goal is to show the jury that the killing of Clodius was not an isolated incident, but the inevitable culmination of a long and bloody career as a public menace. Yes, they argue, exactly the kind of person who would plan an ambush. The historical evidence for who actually started the fight is, as we've seen, hopelessly murky. There's no CSI, Appian Way to analyze blood spatter or ballistics. It all comes down to which narrative you believe. The prosecution's case relies on creating a narrative where Milo is the aggressor and Clodius the victim. This is a point of constant debate for historians. How much of the prosecution's case was solid evidence, and how much was pure political spin? For instance, was Clodius' entourage really just a happy-go-lucky campaign rally? Or was that a deliberate misrepresentation of his own gang of thugs? The prosecution, of course, presents it as the former. For 3 days, this is the story the jury hears, piece by piece. It's a compelling, straightforward, and damning account. By the end of the 3rd day, the mood in the forum is grim. The weight of the evidence, or at least the evidence presented, seems overwhelming. Milo looks like a guilty man. The pressure now shifts entirely to Cicero. He has 3 hours to undo 3 days of carefully constructed accusations. After a tense 1-day break, it is the final day of the trial. The forum is packed. The sun beats down on the silent ranks of Pompey's soldiers. It is Cicero's turn to speak. He ascends the rostra, the speaker's platform, knowing that the fate of his friend, his own reputation, and perhaps the future of the conservative faction in the Senate rests on the next 3 hours. His task is monumental. He cannot deny the killing. So, he must embrace it. He must transform an act of brutal violence into an act of patriotic duty. His entire defense rests on a single, powerful argument, non modo idior theory, sed idiom necessario. Not only was it done lawfully, but it was done from necessity. He will argue self-minus defense, but on a grand scale. This was not just Milo's self-minus defense. It was the Republic's self-minus defense. Cicero begins by turning the prosecution's narrative completely on its head. Every piece of evidence they presented as proof of Milo's guilt, Cicero interprets as proof of his innocence. The prosecution said Milo had a heavy guard. Of course he did, Cicero thunders. Every sensible man knew the danger posed by Clodius. Traveling without a guard when Clodius was known to be on the same road would have been suicide. The guard was not a sign of aggression. It was a sign of prudence. The prosecution said Clodius was lightly equipped, unready for a fight. This, Cicero claims, is the most cunning lie of all. He argues that this was the very essence of Clodius' ambush plan. He deliberately traveled light to appear as the victim. He knew Milo was coming. He knew the time. He knew the place. Clodius, the master of street violence, chose the time and place for this confrontation. He was the hunter, not the hunted. How did Clodius know Milo would be on the road? Cicero creates a plausible, if improbable, timeline. Clodius knew Milo, as the dictator of Law Nuvium, had to be there on that day for a religious ceremony. Milo's journey was predictable. Clodius' journey, however, was not. He had attended a political meeting that day and had announced he was staying in town, only to suddenly leave in the afternoon. Why? To lay his trap, Cicero insists. He then launches into a masterful character assassination of the dead man. This is a classic legal tactic, but Cicero raises it to an art form. He cannot be sued for libel by a corpse. He paints Clodius not as a champion of the people, but as a monster, a plague, a madman whose entire life was a war against law, morality, and the gods themselves. He brings up every scandal from Clodius's past, the Boonidee sacrilege, the political violence, the intimidation, the alleged incest with his own sister. Celodia rumor so persistent it has become part of his story. This is a key part of his strategy. If he can convince the jury that Clodius was not a normal citizen but a public enemy, a hostis, then killing him ceases to be a crime. There is a concept in Roman law, or at least in Roman rhetoric, of a justifiable tyrannicide. Cicero is arguing that Milo did not murder a politician. He slew a tyrant. He performed a public service. He did the dirty work that the weak and fearful Senate had failed to do for a decade. He was not a murderer. He was a hero. Here we come across a truly bizarre little anecdote from this period. One of the claims Cicero makes, or at least was planning to make in his written speech, is that Clodius was so pathologically obsessed with violence that he had a list of planned future crimes, including the murder of several prominent senators. Where did he get this information? He claims it came from Clodius's own captured slaves, who had supposedly revealed all their master's wicked secrets. This highlights the uncomfortable truth about evidence in the Roman world. Testimony extracted from slaves, often under torture, was considered a legitimate, if not entirely reliable, source of information. The reliability of such evidence is, of course, a subject of fierce debate among classicists. Cicero's argument is a masterpiece of rhetoric. He appeals to the jurors' sense of order, their fear of mob rule, their aristocratic prejudices. He is asking them to look past the ugly reality of the killing and see the beautiful ideal behind it, the restoration of order. He famously poses the question, if you had a choice to bring one of them back to life, Clodius or Milo, who would you choose? This is the speech he planned to give. The oration we have today, the Pro Milone, is the version he wrote and published after the trial. It is considered one of the greatest works of Latin prose ever written. But what he wrote in the quiet of his study and what he actually said in the terrifying atmosphere of the Forum were two very different things. Let's pause the action for a moment and consider the very nature of the evidence being presented. You're sitting on the jury, or maybe you're just a spectator, standing behind the cordon of Pompey's soldiers. You've heard the prosecution's witnesses. You're listening to Cicero's soaring rhetoric. How do you decide who is telling the truth? The simple, and for a modern observer, terrifying answer is, you can't, not in the way we understand it today. Welcome to a murder trial without a single piece of forensic evidence. There is no crime scene investigation. No one has cordoned off the patch of the Appian Way where the brawl happened. No one is dusting the tavern for fingerprints, a concept that won't exist for another 2 millennia. There are no ballistics experts to analyze the thrust of Baria's spear or the stab wounds on Clodius's body to determine the angle of attack. There is no DNA evidence to place specific individuals at specific locations. The murder weapons themselves, the swords and spears, have likely been cleaned and put away. They are just tools of the trade for Milo's gladiators. The entire case, from start to finish, rests on 2 pillars: eyewitness testimony and rhetoric. And both are notoriously unreliable. Let's look at the eyewitnesses. You heard from them during the first 3 days. Who were they? Travelers on the road, servants from the inn, and survivors from Clodius's entourage. Each one comes with their own set of biases. The travelers probably only saw a fraction of the event, and their memory is colored by the fear and chaos of the moment. Did they really see who shoved whom first? Or did they just see a confusing, violent blur? The servants at the inn were likely terrified low-status individuals, easily pressured by the high-ranking officials questioning them. And then you have Clodius's men. Are they giving an objective account? Of course not. They are members of a defeated gang, testifying against the rival who killed their leader and patron. Their testimony is driven by a desire for revenge and loyalty to their fallen leader. Similarly, any of Milo's men who might have testified would be telling a story that absolved their master of all guilt. Every witness has a dog in this fight. This leads to a fascinating, and still debated, question among legal historians. Did the Romans have a concept of perjury in the modern sense? Yes, they did, but enforcing it was incredibly difficult. In a trial so politically charged, jurors would likely assume that witnesses for the opposing side were lying. The challenge was to prove they were lying with contradictory evidence, but to persuade the jury that they were the kind of people who would lie. The focus was on the character of the witness, not the objective truth of their statement. Cicero would spend less time disproving a witness's account and more time arguing that the witness was a worthless scoundrel whose words meant nothing. Without physical evidence, the trial becomes a pure storytelling contest. It's about who can construct the more plausible, or more emotionally appealing, narrative. The prosecution's story is simple and visceral. A powerful noble ambushes and butchers a popular leader. It's a tale of aristocratic arrogance. Cicero's story is more complex and philosophical. A patriot reluctantly slays a public enemy to save the republic. It's a tale of heroic necessity. The jury is not a panel of detached, impartial observers. They are Roman nobles and wealthy citizens, deeply embedded in the political and social fabric of the city. They know the defendant and the victim, at least by reputation. They have their own political allegiances, their own fears about the state of the republic, their own prejudices against the mob. Cicero isn't just speaking to them as jurors. He's speaking to them as members of their class, reminding them that the chaos Clodius unleashed could one day consume them, too. So you are left in a sea of he said, she said. Did Milo leave Rome that day intending to kill Clodius? Did Clodius leave Rome that day intending to kill Milo? There is no secret document, no smoking gun to prove premeditation on either side. There is only the word of biased men, interpreted by an even more biased lawyer, presented to a jury that is anything but impartial. This is how the Roman justice system worked at its highest levels. A messy, human, and deeply flawed battle of narratives, where the truth was not something to be discovered, but something to be constructed. Now zoom back in on Cicero. He stands on the rostra, the text of his brilliant, meticulously crafted speech ready in his mind. He has the arguments, the legal precedents, the savage character assassinations. He is ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. But the atmosphere in the forum is not conducive to calm, reasoned oratory. It's thick with menace. The first and most obvious source of pressure is the visual presence of Pompey's soldiers. They are everywhere. They line the perimeter of the forum, their shields locked, their spears upright. They are a silent, disciplined, and overwhelming display of state power. Their presence is a constant, physical reminder that this trial is happening on Pompey's terms. While they are ostensibly there to keep order, their gaze feels directed as much at the participants of the trial as at the crowds beyond. Every word Cicero speaks is being judged not just by the jury, but by the man who commands those legions. Pompey himself is presiding, watching from his seat of honor, his face an unreadable mask. It's like trying to perform a delicate surgery with a lion watching you from the corner of the room. The second source of pressure is auditory. Beyond the cordon of soldiers, the square is packed with the public, and they are not a quiet, respectful audience. They are, for the most part, Clodius's supporters, the remnants of his gangs, his clients, the poor of the city who saw him as their champion. They have all turned out for the final day. They cannot get close enough to physically interfere, but they can make their presence known. As Cicero begins to speak, a low murmur starts from the crowd. It grows into a rumble, then into outright shouting. They hurl insults at him. Liar. Murderer's friend. They scream Milo's name, followed by curses. They are creating a wall of hostile sound, a constant, unnerving barrage of pure hatred. For an orator like Cicero, who relied on pacing, on dramatic pauses, on modulating the tone of his voice, this is devastating. It's like a musician trying to play a violin concerto in the middle of a football riot. He has to shout to be heard over the din, which ruins any attempt at nuance or emotional subtlety. This is a point that ancient commentators and modern historians all agree on. The crowd's hostility was a major factor. They were deliberately trying to unnerve him, to throw him off his game, and it was working. This was the hushed, respectful silence of the Senate chamber where he was used to speaking. This was raw, public animosity. Now imagine the state of the jury. These 51 men are sitting there, trying to listen to the arguments, but they are just as intimidated as Cicero. They can hear the mob baying for blood. They can see Pompey's soldiers. They know that a verdict of not guilty might very well trigger a new wave of riots. They might be targeted personally. Their homes could be attacked. They also know that Pompey, the show consul, clearly wants a conviction to pacify the city and demonstrate his authority. Acquitting Milo would be seen as a direct defiance of the most powerful man in Rome. Their personal safety and their political futures are on the line. They are not just weighing evidence, they are weighing their own survival. And what about the witnesses? Even before the final speeches, during the first 3 days of testimony, this atmosphere of fear had its effect. Any witness brave enough to speak in Milo's defense would have had to walk through that same hostile crowd. They would have been jeered and threatened. One of Milo's key witnesses, a man named Marcus Laterensis, was reportedly so intimidated by the mob that he could barely speak his testimony. This climate of fear taints everything. It silences dissenting voices and emboldens those who support the popular narrative. The pressure is immense, a perfect storm of military intimidation, mob hostility, and political necessity. Cicero, the master of words, finds himself in a situation where words seem to be failing, drowned out by the primal scream of the mob and the silent threat of the sword. The great orator, for one of the few times in his celebrated career, is losing his nerve. This is the moment where the legend of Cicero collides with the reality of the man. We have the text of the Pro Milone, a polished masterpiece of legal reasoning and rhetorical fire. But the speech he actually delivered on that day was, by all accounts, a shadow of its written counterpart. As he stands on the rostra, the combined pressure becomes too much. The shouting of the mob, the unnerving silence of the soldiers, the cold stare of Pompey. It all conspires to break his legendary composure. The man who had faced down conspiracies and swayed the Senate with his words begins to falter. Ancient sources, including the biographer Plutarch, are clear on this point. Cicero was visibly terrified. His voice, usually so powerful and controlled, became weak and tremulous. His arguments, which should have flowed in a seamless, logical progression, came out disjointed and confused. He lost his place. The rhythm and cadence that were the hallmarks of his oratory deserted him. He was stammering, hesitant, and unconvincing. You can almost feel his panic. He looks out at the jury, hoping to connect with them, but sees only fear in their eyes. He glances at the ranks of soldiers, and the glint of sun on their helmets seems to mock his powerlessness. He hears the roar of the crowd, and every insult feels like a physical blow. The master of the stage has succumbed to a crippling case of stage fright. This was just an off day. Cicero himself, in later letters, obliquely admits to his poor performance. It became something of a known event among his contemporaries. His failure was as public as his many triumphs. This is a fascinatedly human moment for a figure who is often mythologized into a marble bust. Cicero, the intellectual giant, was still a man, susceptible to fear like anyone else. The content of his speech likely followed the broad strokes of his planned defense, the self-minus defense argument, the attack on Clodius's character. But the delivery lacked all conviction. The soaring passages about slaying a tyrant probably sounded less like a heroic call to arms and more like a desperate, witty plea. The clever legal arguments were likely lost in the stammering delivery and the overwhelming noise. There's a great historical irony here. Cicero's entire philosophy of law and politics was based on the power of reasoned speech, ratio et orati, to overcome brute force. He believed that civilization was built on the ability to persuade, not to compel. Yet in this crucial moment, he was faced with the raw, undeniable power of both the mob and the military. And his greatest weapon, his voice, failed him. It was a personal failure, but it was also a symbolic failure for the republican ideals he championed. The sword, on this day, was mightier than the word. One particular detail that some historians speculate about is the effect of Pompey's new time limits. Cicero was used to speaking for hours, to building a slow, meticulous case. Being forced into a compressed 3-hour window, combined with the extreme pressure, might have disrupted his natural style and contributed to his poor performance. He cowed and settled into his usual rhythm. As he speaks, you can see the case slipping away. The jurors, who might have been swayed by a powerful, confident Cicero, are now looking at a frightened man delivering a weak speech. Any hope that his oratory could overcome the political realities of the situation is evaporating. He is not giving them the heroic narrative they would need to cling to if they were to risk an acquittal. He is giving them nothing to work with. When his 3 hours are up, he descends from the rostra, not with the triumphant air of a victorious lawyer, but with the defeated slump of a man who knows he has failed. He failed his client, his friend, and his own high standards. He has delivered what was likely the worst major speech of his entire career, at the moment when he needed to deliver his best. The prosecution, which had presented a simple, clear narrative of murder, now looked even stronger in comparison. The stage was set for the verdict, and there was little doubt in the forum as to what it would be. The speeches are over. The forum falls into a tense, expectant silence, the shouting of the crowd momentarily subdued as the jurors file away to cast their votes. There is no long deliberation in a private room. The process is swift and public. The jury consists of 51 men. Each juror is given to wax tablets. One is marked with the letter A for absolvio, meaning I absolve, a vote for acquittal. The other is marked with a C for condemno, meaning I condemn, a vote for guilty. They walk one by one past and earn and deposit the tablet that represents their verdict, discarding the other. The process is designed to be secret, but in this pressure minus cooker environment, nothing feels truly anonymous. The jurors are acutely aware that they are being watched, by Pompey, by the soldiers, and by the public. As the votes are being cast, you can feel the weight of the inevitable. Cicero's faltering speech has done little to shift the political calculus. The jurors are trapped. A vote to acquit Milo would be a vote for continued chaos. It would infuriate the populace, potentially reigniting the riots. It would be a slap in the face to Pompey, who has staked his authority on restoring order through this trial. It would be an act of immense political courage, or perhaps political suicide. A vote to convict, on the other hand, is the path of least resistance. It placates them all. It satisfies Pompey. It presents an image of the law working, of justice being done, even if the process was a sham. It allows the city to move on. For a juror who wants to sleep soundly in his bed that night, the choice is clear. The votes are tipped out of the urn and counted publicly. The clerk begins to tally the results. A murmur goes through the crowd as the count becomes clear. The final verdict is announced. By a vote of 38 to 13, Milo is found guilty. Condemno. It's a decisive conviction. The majority of the jurors have chosen the safe, politically expedient path. Milo's gamble has failed. Cicero's oratory has failed. The power of the establishment, embodied in Pompey, has won. The reaction is immediate. A cheer erupts from the Claudian supporters in the crowd. They have their justice. Their hero has been avenged. The verdict validates their rage and their actions. Pompey allows himself a slight, satisfied nod. His authority is confirmed. Order has been imposed. Milo receives the verdict with a stoicism that would be praised by later writers. He doesn't break down or protest. He accepts his fate. The sentence for a conviction under Pompey's new law, divi, is exile. He is to be banished from Rome and from Italy, stripped of his property, and forced to live out his days as an outcast. For a Roman nobleman, for whom life outside of Rome was barely life at all, this was a political death sentence. This verdict is a landmark moment, and its interpretation has been a subject of debate for centuries. Was this a just verdict? By modern standards, absolutely not. The trial was a farce, riddled with intimidation and political interference. But did it convict a guilty man? This is the more complicated question. Milo's men did, in fact, kill Clodius. The self-minus defense claim was plausible but unproven. So a man who was factually responsible for a killing was convicted in a deeply unfair trial. Historians often refer to this as an instance where a correct verdict was reached through incorrect means. The verdict also sends a powerful message to the Roman elite. The old way of doing things, of settling political disputes with private armies, is over. Or rather, it is now only permissible for the one man in charge. Pompey has effectively monopolized violence. He has disarmed the aristocratic gangs and established himself as the sole guarantor of order. It's a step away from the chaotic oligarchy of the late Republic and a step towards the autocracy of the empire. The conviction of Milo is one of the final nails in the coffin of the old system. For Cicero, the defeat is crushing. He has failed to save his friend and has been personally humiliated. He will later publish the brilliant speech he wishes he had given, partly to salvage his reputation and partly as a final tribute to his friend. That written speech, the Pro Milone, will become a classic, studied by students for its rhetorical genius. But it will always be a reminder of the day his words failed him. The verdict is in, the case is closed, and the main players must now live with the consequences. The sentence is passed, and Milo prepares for his new life as an exile. He has to leave Italy, never to return, on pain of death. His vast properties are confiscated, to be sold off to pay his debts and replenish the state treasury. He has lost everything, his home, his political career, his place in the world. He chooses the city of Massilia as his destination. Today, we know it as Marseille, in the south of France. In ancient times, Massilia was a vibrant, wealthy, and highly civilized port city. It was an old Greek colony, famous for its culture and learning, and it had a long minus-standing alliance with Rome. As far as places of exile go, it was a comfortable, even luxurious, choice. It was the ancient equivalent of being forced to retire to the French Riviera. Shortly after his arrival in Massilia, Milo receives a package from his friend Cicero. Inside is a copy of the speech that Cicero had written but had been too terrified to deliver properly. The powerful, polished, perfect version of the Pro Milone. It is a masterpiece, a literary monument to what might have been. Milo reads the speech, with all its soaring defenses of his heroism and its brilliant legal arguments. After finishing it, he is said to have sent a reply back to Cicero. This reply contains one of the most famous and bitingly sarcastic lines in all of Roman history. He wrote, "I am glad you were not able to deliver this speech in court, for if you had, I should not now be enjoying the delicious mullets of Massilia." What a lie. It's a perfect piece of gallows humor. A wry, cynical comment on the whole affair. On the surface, it's a compliment to Cicero's rhetorical power. Your speech is so good. It would have gotten me acquitted. But underneath, there's a bitter edge. It's the comment of a man who has accepted his fate and is detached enough to joke about it. Here's, in a way, releasing Cicero from his guilt. Don't worry about it, my friend. I'm fine. The fish here is excellent. This little anecdote, whether it's completely true or a later invention, has fascinated historians for ages. What does it tell us about Milo's character? It suggests a man of immense self minus possession and a cynical, world minus weary wit. He has played the great game of Roman politics. He has lost, and now he is simply getting on with what's left of his life. He has no illusions about what happened. He knows the trial was political theater and the verdict was predetermined. Cicero's perfect speech wouldn't have changed a thing in the face of Pompey's legions. His comment is a tacit acknowledgement of that reality. The mullets of Massilia are a concrete, sensual pleasure, far more real than the abstract ideals of Roman justice that had so spectacularly failed him. The specific mention of mullets is a wonderful little detail. The red mullet mulus was an absolute delicacy in the Roman world, a ridiculously expensive luxury item. Wealthy Romans would host dinner parties where live mullets were brought to the table in glass jars so the guests could watch them die, as their scales would change color in a vibrant display, which was considered the height of entertainment. Milo's comment is therefore a deeply ironic statement on his new status. He is an exile, but he is a wealthy exile. He can still afford the finest things in life. Milo's story does not end here, however. He remains in Massilia for several years, living a life of comfortable obscurity. But the quiet life was never really for him. A few years later, in 48 BC, the Roman world is once again convulsed, this time by the great civil war between Pompey and Julius Caesar. Caesar, having conquered all, marches on Rome. Pompey, the supposed champion of the Republic, is forced to flee. From his exile, Milo sees an opportunity. He sees the chaos as a chance to return to Italy and reclaim his power. He joins a minor rebellion against Caesar's authority in southern Italy, hoping to rally old supporters and carve out a new role for himself. It is a foolish, desperate gamble. The rebellion is quickly crushed by Caesar's forces. While besieging a small town, Milo is struck and killed by a stone thrown from the town walls. It is an anonymous, pathetic end for the man who once commanded one of the most feared gangs in Rome and stood at the center of its most sensational trial. He died not in a grand battle, but in a pointless skirmish, his dreams of a comeback literally crushed by a rock. Now let's pull the camera back from the mullets of Massilia and the lonely death of Milo. Let's look at the city of Rome in the aftermath of the trial. The verdict has been delivered. The great man has been exiled. Has Pompey's iron-minus fisted justice healed the Republic? Not even close. The murder of Clodius and the subsequent trial did not solve any of the underlying problems. In fact, they only served to expose the deep, festering wounds that were slowly killing the Roman Republic. The entire affair was a symptom of a terminal illness, not the cause of it. The first and most obvious crack that the incident revealed was the complete breakdown of the rule of law. For years, the streets of Rome had been controlled by political gangs, not by legitimate state authority. The state had become so dysfunctional that private citizens like Milo had to raise their own armies to protect themselves and their political interests. The trial of Milo didn't restore the rule of law. It just replaced the chaos of competing gangs with the orderly, state-sanctioned violence of a single autocrat, Pompey. People in Rome might have felt safer, but they were certainly not more free. The Republic was supposed to be a system of laws, not of men. This event proved that a single powerful man was now more important than any law. Secondly, the affair exposed the lethal levels of political polarization. The division between the optimates, the conservative aristocrats, and the populist leaders had become an unbridgeable chasm. There was no more middle ground, no room for compromise. Politics was a zero-sum game. Your opponent was not just a rival to be defeated in an election. He was an enemy to be destroyed, exiled, or, as Clodius discovered, killed. Fulvia's use of her husband's corpse and the mob's burning of the Senate House were not acts of normal political discourse. They were acts of revolutionary rage, demonstrating that a significant portion of the population had lost all faith in the institutions of the state. This leads to a question that historians still grapple with. Was the fall of the Republic inevitable at this point? Or was there a chance to save it? The Clodius affair is often cited by the inevitability camp. They argue that the system was already so broken, the norms of political behavior so degraded, that some form of autocracy was the only possible outcome. The Republic was a system designed for a small city-state, and it simply couldn't cope with the immense wealth, power, and social tensions of a world-spanning empire. Others, however, argue that key individuals still could have made different choices that might have steered Rome away from the abyss. If the Senate had been more willing to address the legitimate grievances of the urban poor, could they have robbed populists like Clodius of their power base? It's one of history's great what-ifs. The final, and perhaps most significant, consequence of the whole messy business was the precedent it set for Pompey's sole consulship. Handing supreme power to one man to solve a crisis became a viable, even attractive, option. The Senate thought they were using Pompey to fix a temporary problem. But in reality, Pompey was using the problem to consolidate his own power. This act directly paved the way for the greater conflict to come. Just a few years later, the rivalry between Pompey and the now spectacularly successful Julius Caesar would come to a head. Caesar, seeing Pompey's consolidation of power in Rome, would feel cornered and threatened. He would eventually cross the Rubicon River with his legions, uttering the famous phrase "Alia iacta est," the die is cast, and plunging the Roman world into a cataclysmic civil war. The very man the Senate had empowered to save the Republic, Pompey, would end up leading its armies in a war that would ultimately destroy it. The man who presided over the trial of one gang leader would be defeated by another, far more brilliant one. So the seemingly isolated incident on the Appian Way, a brawl between two political thugs, was actually a microcosm of the entire Republican collapse. It had everything: street violence, political polarization, the failure of institutions, and the rise of military strongmen. It was a dress rehearsal for the main event. The fire that burned the Curia was a prelude to the fires of a civil war that would consume the entire Roman world, and from whose ashes the Roman Empire, ruled by an emperor, would finally rise. The body of Clodius, left on the dusty road, was just one of the first of many that would pave the way for the end of an era. The sounds of the Forum have faded now. The angry shouts of the mob, the tramp of the soldiers' feet, the desperate, failing voice of Cicero, they all dissolve into the quiet of the night. The story is over. The dust has settled on the Appian Way, and the great, lumbering machine of history has rolled on, leaving our players to their fates. You can feel the weight of it all beginning to lift, like a heavy blanket being slowly drawn away. The sharp edges of the past soften, blurring into the gentle landscape of a dream. You are no longer on the cold stone steps of the Forum, but drifting in a quiet, comfortable space. The anxieties of the trial, the fear and the anger, they belong to another world, another time. Here, there is only stillness. The echo of those ancient events becomes a soft, distant hum, like the sound of a far-off city heard from a high hill. It's a lullaby of history, a reminder that all the fury and ambition of mankind eventually settles into silence. The figures of Clodius, Milo, Cicero, and Pompey recede, becoming just names whispered on the wind. Their struggles, which seemed so monumental, so consuming, And now just a story to help you drift away. Let the rhythm of that story carry you now, gently, down into a deeper, more peaceful state of rest. Let the noise of the past give way to the profound, healing quiet of your own sleep.